I always suspected our HOA president had a god complex, but I never imagined he'd actually pull a gun on my wife. Not in broad daylight, not in our own driveway. And definitely not over something as ridiculous as the color of our car, asterisk, but what? Gerald Whitman didn't know. What would become his undoing was that my wife had just returned from a 16-month special ops deployment. Pointing a weapon at her wasn't just reckless. It was suicidal. Asterisk, he thought she was just another housewife. In reality, he was threatening a trained tactical intelligence officer whose job had been dismantling insurgencies. Within weeks, she would do just that, only this time it wasn't overseas. It was right here in Oak Ridge Estates. And it all started because Gerald couldn't stand the red paint on our Tesla, asterisk, before we dive in. Drop your city in the comments. I'd love to know how far this story travels. Asterisk, Oak Ridge Estates look like the picture of suburban perfection. Perfect lawns, copy-paste houses, identical mailboxes, and an HOA that regulated your life down to the inch. Curtain color, grass. Height, how long your garage could stay open, you name it. There was a rule for it. Asterisk, my wife, Alexis, and I had lived here for 5 years. We loved our home, a classic colonial with blue shutters and a maple tree out front. For the first 2 years, life was peaceful. Then Gerald Whitman got elected HOA president. Asterisk, I should have known trouble was coming the day of the 4th of July. Barbecue 3 years ago? Gerald cornered me at the drinks table, slapping a beefy hand on my shoulder. Asterisk, Nathan, he said, you should join our little golf group. Just a few of us exclusive, asterisk, I declined. Between work and caring for the house while Alexis was deployed, I didn't have time for golf. His smile thinned. Maybe next time, he said. But the cold in his eyes said otherwise. Asterisk, the next morning, I got my first violation notice. My grass was apparently a 1/4 inch too tall. My blue shutters, not the approved shade. From there, it only escalated. Asterisk, over 3 years, it became a slow war, the way my hose was stored. How many hours the garage door was left open. What day I could take the trash out. Each violation came with a fine, and each fine came with Gerald's smug handwriting. Asterisk, then Alexis deployed again for 16 months. And with her gone, Gerald cranked up the pressure. Asterisk, what he didn't know was that Alexis wasn't just another soldier. She was a captain in special operations, trained for deep intelligence, high-risk takedowns, and psychological warfare, asterisk, and she was coming home, asterisk, I didn't tell anyone about her return. Not even Monica Wilson, our friendly neighbor who also served as HOA secretary and had quietly helped me navigate Gerald's petty tyranny. I wanted Alexis's homecoming to be a surprise. And I didn't trust Gerald not to weaponize it, asterisk, I cleaned the house, stocked her favorite snacks, and then I bought a bright red Tesla, a welcome home gift. It was bold. Gerald had specifically banned that shade of red in his updated aesthetic guidelines. I parked it right in the driveway, asterisk, I wasn't just expecting trouble. I was counting on it. Asterisk, when Alexis walked through the airport terminal, she looked different, leaner, sharper. Her eyes scanned everything, alert like she was still in the field. When she saw me, though, that sharpness melted into a smile. We held each other right there in the crowd. Asterisk, on the ride home, I thought about warning her, about Gerald, about the HOA madness, but I didn't. She'd been in war zones. She didn't need my neighborhood drama on her first day home, asterisk, then we turned into our street. Asterisk, her eyes widened. Is that? Asterisk, I grinned. Welcome home, babe. Asterisk, she ran her hand over the Tesla. Nathan, it's beautiful. But can we afford this? Asterisk, we've been saving, I said. You earned this. I didn't mention it was an act of war. That night after dinner and wine, we curled up on the couch. She told me what little she could about her mission. I filled her in on the neighborhood, skipping the worst of Gerald's antics. But she saw right through it. Asterisk, what's going on with you and the HOA president? She asked, sharp as ever. You tense up every time he rolls by. I tried to brush it off, but she wasn't buying it. Nathan, she said, her tone dropping, I've spent 16 months reading people's faces to predict whether they were going to try to kill me. You're hiding something. Asterisk, so I told her everything, the golf club, the violations, the garage door, the garbage day, the Tesla paint rule, asterisk. When I finished, she was silent, but her stillness? It wasn't peace. It was the calm before the storm, asterisk. Why didn't you tell me? She asked, asterisk. Because you were deployed in a literal war zone, I said. I didn't want to burden you with, asterisk. She cut me off. Nathan, anything that affects you affects me? Asterisk. Then she said something that chilled me. I'll handle it. Asterisk. The next morning, she didn't move the Tesla. In fact, she parked it even more visibly, asterisk. When I raised an eyebrow, she simply said, in tactical ops, sometimes you draw out your enemy to assess his weaknesses. Asterisk. That was the last calm moment of the day. Asterisk. I was on a Zoom call when I heard raised voices outside. I looked out the window and froze. Gerald was storming up the driveway, flanked by two men. His so-called neighborhood security team, asterisk. Then I saw it. His hand was on his hip, the grip of his custom Glock. Fully exposed, Alexis was standing beside the Tesla, calm, watching, waiting. I sprinted outside. Asterisk. Mrs. Walker. Gerald barked. This is your final warning. This vehicle must be removed. Asterisk. Alexis didn't move. This is my property, parked on my driveway. Maybe you should reconsider your approach. Asterisk. Gerald's face turned a deeper red. As HOA security, I have the authority to enforce guidelines. Then he did it. He unsnapped his holster and drew his gun. Not in the air, not as a bluff. Pointed near her feet. Asterisk. This vehicle is being confiscated for multiple violations, he declared. Asterisk. The two men beside him? They looked terrified, asterisk. Alexis straightened slowly. Hands visible, calm, like a bomb technician defusing a live wire. Asterisk. Mr. Whitman, she said, voice cold as ice. You are brandishing a weapon on private property without cause. That is a felony. Holster your weapon now? Asterisk. Gerald's hand twitched. I have authority, he yelled. This neighborhood deputized me. Asterisk. No civilian HOA has the legal right to deputize armed security, Alexis replied. And if you don't step back, I will treat this as a hostile armed threat, asterisk. His face contorted with rage. Do you know who I am? I was law enforcement. For 15 years, Gerald ruled our neighborhood with unchecked power. But that afternoon, a new voice cut through the tension like a blade. Asterisk. 15 years? A voice called out. Was it really, Gerald? Because the department records I reviewed show only 3. And they ended in a dishonorable discharge for excessive force. Asterisk. We all turned. Standing calmly at the edge of our driveway was Officer James Mitchell, one hand resting easily on his police-issued sidearm. Gerald's face turned from angry red to chalky white, asterisk. James. Alexis said with a nod. Asterisk. Captain Walker, he replied, returning the nod. Didn't expect to see you back so soon. Asterisk. Gerald's head whipped between them, confusion growing alongside his fear. You two know each other? Asterisk. James offered a tight smile. Captain Walker and I served together before I joined the force. When I heard she was back in town, I figured I'd stop by and welcome her home. Then his gaze zeroed in on Gerald. I also received reports about someone impersonating law enforcement in this area. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you, Gerald? Asterisk. Gerald's hand, still near the butt of his weapon, trembled slightly. I'm security, he said, his voice cracking. I have the right to enforce community guidelines. Asterisk. What? You don't have, James said as he took a step forward. Is the right to carry a concealed weapon without a license? According to state records, you don't have one. You also don't have the right to brandish that weapon on private property. Or impersonate a police officer, which that badge on your chest certainly suggests. Asterisk. Gerald went pale. One of his so-called security team began inching away, clearly deciding this was not a hill worth dying on. Asterisk. This is HOA business, Gerald tried again, desperation creeping in. It doesn't concern the actual police. Asterisk. James raised an eyebrow. Brandishing a firearm without a permit? That very much concerns the police. And threatening a decorated military officer? Even more so, asterisk. Gerald blinked. Military officer? He asked, stunned. Asterisk. James nodded. Captain Alexis Walker? Special Operations. Just returned from a 16-month deployment in one of the world's most dangerous regions. And you pulled a gun on her in her own driveway. Asterisk. Several things happened. At once, Gerald fumbled to reholster his weapon. His last remaining security teammate broke into a full sprint down the driveway. And a silver Mercedes pulled to the curb. Pamela Whitman at the wheel, her face twisted in disapproval as she surveyed the scene. Asterisk. The next evening, the community center was standing room only. Word had spread, as it always does in suburbia. Pamela had assumed her husband's role as acting HOA president, and she'd turned the space into something that resembled a political press conference. A massive banner behind her read, "Neighborhood security is our top priority." Asterisk. Monica, seated at the secretary's desk, rolled her eyes when she spotted us. Alexis sat beside me, radiating calm authority even in plain clothes. Asterisk. Pamela banged the gavel. As I'm sure you're all aware, she began, her voice brittle with restrained fury. My husband was unjustly detained yesterday while performing his duties as HOA security director. This incident raises serious concerns about outside threats. Asterisk. Then came the PowerPoint presentation complete with grainy, obviously altered images of our Tesla and a morning run photo of Alexis that made her look like she was casing houses instead of jogging. Asterisk. Pamela pointed dramatically at the screen. The individual in question, she said, has refused to comply with community guidelines and engaged in threatening behavior toward HOA officials. Asterisk. I stood to object, but Alexis gently placed a hand on my arm, keeping me seated. She was studying Pamela with the same calm intensity she had used on Gerald, watching, reading every move. Asterisk. The next slide outlined proposed emergency security measures, increased fines, mandatory ID checks for all visitors, and most ludicrous of all, a designated parking inspector with full authority to tow vehicles. Asterisk. Eleanor Williams, a retired school teacher and one of the longest tenured residents, raised her hand. Isn't this all a bit extreme, Pamela? It sounds like you're turning Oak Ridge Estates into a police state over a parking disagreement. Asterisk. Pamela's lips stretched into a tight smile. This is about more than parking, Eleanor. It's about order, security. Asterisk. From the back, Robert. Thompson raised his voice. Gerald pulled a gun on someone in their own driveway. The real threat to our security is the AOA. That's when Alexis stood. The room fell completely silent. Asterisk. Before we vote on anything, she said, her voice calm but powerful. I'd like to correct a few inaccuracies in Mrs. Whitman's presentation. Asterisk. Pamela flushed. This is a closed meeting. Only residents in good standing may speak. Asterisk. Alexis didn't flinch. I am a resident, Captain Alexis Walker, homeowner at 1422 Oak Ridge Drive. I've lived here for 5 years and recently returned from a 16-month special operations deployment. She stepped forward and placed a thick folder on the table before Pamela. This, she said, is a financial breakdown of the HOAS records over the past 3 years, cross-referenced with neighborhood improvements and services. Pamela stared at the folder as if it might explode. That's confidential information, she whispered. Asterisk. Actually, it's not, Alexis replied. Under state law, HOA financial records must be made available to all homeowners upon request. Monica helped me access them. Asterisk. Every eye in the room turned to Monica, who nodded firmly. It's true. I've been reminding Gerald of that for years. Asterisk. Alexis continued. The records show nearly $175,000 in unexplained administrative fees and security enhancements, none of which correspond to real improvements. Fines have increased by 340% since Gerald took over, and 87% of those were issued to just 5 households, all of whom had past conflicts with him. Pamela opened her mouth, but no sound came out. At that moment, Daniel Harrison stood from the second row and opened his briefcase. Asterisk. These findings aren't baseless, he said. I've conducted a legal analysis. There are at least 12 violations. of state HOA regulations and possible criminal charges for financial misconduct. Asterisk, the meeting descended into chaos from Pamelo's perspective anyway. Residents began shouting questions, demanding transparency, asking about specific charges, and organizing impromptu petitions. Then the community center doors opened again. Officer James Mitchell entered. Asterisk, behind him were two people in dark suits. I didn't recognize them, but Alexis straightened subtly. Asterisk, these FBI agents, she said, without raising her voice, would also like a look at those financial records. Asterisk, in the days that followed, Gerald remained in jail denied bail due to the weapons charge and fresh evidence of embezzlement. Pamela stayed holed up in their colonial mansion, emerging only briefly, face hidden behind sunglasses, to avoid the neighbors now whispering her name for all the wrong reasons. Asterisk. But Alexis was nowhere near done. The very next morning, I found her at the dining room table, buried in papers meticulously arranged in piles that seemed almost tactical in nature. She had built a color-coded spreadsheet cataloging every HOA, rule change, every fine issued, and each so-called neighborhood improvement project over the past 3 years, cross-referenced and layered with notes. It told a story others had missed. Asterisk. This looks more detailed than some military intel briefs I've seen, I said, studying the spreadsheet in awe. Asterisk. Alexis gave a dry smile. Same principles apply, Spot? The patterns, map out the weaknesses, understand the power structure. Gerald may be local, but his behavior feels like something backed by a bigger machine. At 10 a.m., the doorbell rang. It was Victoria Bennett, one of our quieter neighbors. She walked in looking tense but resolute. As we sat down, she leaned forward and said, I work in financial crimes at First National Bank. Asterisk, that got our attention. Asterisk, 8 months ago, I flagged a series of suspicious transfers from the HOA account. Large sums wired to a company named Whitman Security Consulting. The money didn't stay there. It got funneled into various personal accounts, including the mayor's campaign fund. Asterisk. Alexis didn't flinch. Her eyes flicked back to her notes like she had been expecting this. Asterisk. I filed an internal report. Victoria continued, but I was told to back off. The mayor is a major client of the bank. Then I saw Gerald pull a gun over a parking issue. And, well, that changed everything. She reached into her bag and placed a flash drive on the table. I've been quietly collecting transaction records, public ones. Nothing protected, just enough to show a pattern. I hoped someone else would notice, but no one did. Asterisk. As Victoria laid out the timeline, Alexis was already integrating the data into her sprawling wall diagram. Her eyes locked onto one segment. Asterisk. These payouts to Whitman Security? They match exactly with zoning approvals for Westridge, Alexis said, tapping a chart. And these donations line up with the mayor's quarterly filings. Asterisk. Victoria nodded. Exactly. 3 shell accounts, same money, just laundered. Asterisk. After Victoria left, I looked at Alexis, stunned. How did you know it went this deep? Asterisk. Her expression was hard, focused, because Gerald doesn't act like a man scared of consequences. He acts protected. That confidence always comes from connections. Asterisk. She walked to the wall map and ran a red string from Gerald's photo to the mayor's. Anyone who pulls a gun over a rule violation thinks they're untouchable. I had to find out why. The next few days were a blur of controlled chaos. Alexis dubbed it a multi-front campaign. She collaborated with Victoria to finalize the financial trail, looped in Daniel to document every bylaw abuse, and started holding casual coffee chats in our backyard. Asterisk. People talk when they feel safe, she explained. And everyone here has a Gerald story. One by one, the stories came. Unexplained fines for anyone who opposed him, slashed tires, intimidation tactics especially aimed at older residents. Eleanor Williams, a retired teacher, shared how Gerald had threatened to report her for elder neglect unless she removed bird feeders she'd had for 2 decades. Asterisk. All because I asked where our landscaping funds were going, she said, her hands trembling. Asterisk. Then came Scott Kennedy, a city inspector. He laid out documents showing Gerald had pushed through construction permits, Without city approval for companies tied to the mayor's brother-in-law, I've tried reporting it, Scott said. But every file disappears. Someone at City Hall is scrubbing them. He unfolded a large zoning map with highlighter marks everywhere. These spots had code violations overlooked. These fast-tracked permits and these plots. He pointed to several color-coded parcels, all rezoned just before being bought up by shell companies, all of them tracing back to one corporation. Alexis leaned forward. Let me guess. Holding company connected to the mayor? Scott nodded. His brother-in-law is listed as agent of record. Paper trails buried, but the connections are there. Within days. Our home office transformed into what Alexis called a tactical operations center. One wall held a chronological timeline linking Gerald's decisions to municipal development. Another displayed a web of relationships, Gerald, the mayor, contractors, and corrupt city employees. The third was covered in maps and land records in the military. Alexis said as she pinned another document to the wall. We call this understanding the terrain physical, financial, and social. She stood back, examining the interconnected pieces. Corruption networks work like spiderwebs. Their strength is in the number of threads, but that also means more threads to unravel. By Friday, Alexis had built a case solid enough for Officer James to bring to his higher-ups. Days later, the FBI's Public Corruption Division got involved. White collar isn't usually my beat, James said, dropping by. But they're taking this seriously. The shell company and donation records alone are enough to get warrants. Alexis gave a nod. Start with the outside circle. Flip the smaller players. Work inward. James grinned. The FBI guy said your analysis was textbook. He even asked if you'd consider law enforcement? Alexis laughed, something I hadn't heard all week. Tell him I prefer civilian life. Though apparently I can't go anywhere without stumbling into a covert op. Of course, the opposition hit back. An anonymous complaint went to the military, claiming Alexis had violated her clearance. A city health inspector showed up unannounced, citing routine safety checks. And our supportive neighbors began finding threatening notes on their windshields, but Alexis had predicted all of it. The military dismissed the complaint as nonsense. The health inspector apologized and even documented that the inspection was improperly ordered. And those notes? James pulled footage of Pamela Whitman's car cruising our street at 2 a.m. matching the timeline exactly, Then Gerald made a fatal mistake, out on bail. With strict no-contact conditions, he started driving past our house in the middle of the night. Cameras caught everything, his car, his face. The slow rolls down our street. Next came a desperate emergency HOA meeting held at the Whitman's house. Gerald stood up and ranted about military plants infiltrating the community. He didn't. No two attendees were wearing wiretaps provided by James. He's spiraling. Alexis said while we reviewed the recording. Spiraling leads to mistakes. The very next day, Gerald proved her right using a ladder. He climbed into our backyard through a neighbor's side yard, clearly attempting to avoid cameras. Instead. He found Alexis calmly seated on the patio, tablet in hand. She watched him climb the fence live via split-screen camera feeds. Evening, Gerald, she said without flinching. Violating your bail terms again, are we? The shock on Gerald's face was almost theatrical. His mouth hung open mid-sentence as he froze halfway down the ladder, eyes wide like a deer caught in headlights. This is my neighborhood, he sputtered, the flush of anger creeping up his neck. You people think you can just come in and change the rules? I'd built this community. Alexis didn't flinch. Her voice was calm, precise, deadly, even. The rules haven't changed, Gerald. Trespassing has always been illegal, so has embezzlement, intimidation, and abuse of power. She raised her phone, James's number already cued on the screen. You have 2 choices right now. You can leave immediately and turn yourself in for violating your bail conditions tomorrow morning. Or I can call Officer Mitchell and have you arrested on my property right now. Asterisk less than 24 hours later, Gerald tried to spin the narrative. With an emergency HOA meeting? This time, he was claiming Alexis was a government plant sent to destabilize the neighborhood as part of a covert experiment. I texted Alexis and rushed to the community center, asterisk. Gerald stood at the front of the room looking disheveled but strangely energized, his hands flailing wildly. Asterisk. They've been watching us, he barked, using military surveillance right in our own homes? Asterisk. The crowd murmured, some skeptical, others concerned. Gerald always had a knack for manipulating fear, asterisk, just as I was about to step in. The double doors flew open, asterisk. Alexis entered the room, flanked by Officer James and 2 FBI agents. Gerald stumbled over his words, his face drained of color, asterisk. I think, Alexis said clearly, that everyone here deserves to see the truth, asterisk. James silently connected a laptop to the projector. On the screen, we saw it all: Gerald trespassing at night, then documents showing funds funneling from HOA accounts into shell corporations. Each one bore his signature authorization without board consent. Asterisk. The room exploded into hushed panic. Asterisk. An FBI agent stepped forward, voice cutting through the chaos. Gerald Whitman, you're under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and bail violations. Asterisk. After his second arrest, our neighborhood was suspended in limbo. The HOA became functionally defunct. Pamela Whitman had vanished from public life. No one knew what rules applied anymore, and Alexis saw the perfect window. As she stirred a pot of lentils that evening, she explained, conflict resolution depends on what comes immediately after the fall of an authoritarian figure. This is when communities either regress or evolve, asterisk her plan. Restructure the AHO into a transparent, democratic body, open finances, term limits, community-guided rules. It was simple, elegant, and radical, asterisk. To my surprise, our neighbors welcomed it. After years of petty tyranny, people craved fairness. Asterisk. Monica, once shy and submissive, stepped up as interim president. Eleanor led the bylaws committee. Victoria set up new financial oversight systems. Even Gerald's former supporters signed up to help, desperate to salvage their reputations, asterisk. But while we were rebuilding, the FBI's investigation was accelerating, asterisk. Thanks to Alexis's data, federal agents got warrants for the mayor's office and various local businesses. What began as a neighborhood dispute now had a dedicated newspaper beat. Reporters were calling it AO Agent. Alexis never lost focus, balancing her role in the community rebuild with coordination with federal investigators. Then, the attack came, asterisk. 3 weeks after Gerald's second arrest. Just as indictments against city officials were nearing announcement, I was working late when my phone buzzed home security alert. Multiple breaches, every sector, asterisk. Alexis. I dialed her immediately. No answer, asterisk. Panic surged. I called James, asterisk. I'm already en route, he said. Stay put until I give the all clear. Those 20 minutes felt like years. When James finally called back, his voice was thick with awe. Get home, now. Your wife just captured the mayor's chief of staff and 2 hired men breaking into your house, and recorded everything. Asterisk. When I arrived, the neighborhood looked like a crime scene. Police cruisers lit the street. Neighbors gathered in quiet clusters. News vans loomed at the entrance, asterisk. Alexis sat calmly on our porch, giving a statement. A paramedic was bandaging the wrist of one of the arrested men, asterisk. She looked up and smiled as I approached. Sorry about the noise, she said, like she was apologizing for burning dinner. Asterisk. Later, over tea, she revealed what she'd done. Anticipating retaliation, she'd set a trap, a digital honeypot. Real documents were stored off-site. What remained in the house was bait-rigged with cameras and audio devices, asterisk. The mayor's chief of staff had made several incriminating phone calls from inside our office, unaware they were being recorded. He implicated himself, the mayor, and even state-level officials in one breath. Asterisk. You planned this from the start, I said, staring at her with new understanding. Asterisk. Not from the gun incident, she replied. But I knew before I came home there was something bigger. That moment just gave us legal cover to act. The next morning, it was national news. Special Ops wife foils citywide corruption ring. One headline read. Another. Suburban HOA. Sting exposes millions in fraud. The indictments were sweeping. Gerald, Pamela, Mayor Phillips, the city's development director, 3 council members, and executives from 4 construction firms, all caught in what prosecutors dubbed the largest municipal corruption case in recent history. The schemes went deep: HOA embezzlement, property permit fraud, developer kickbacks, and money laundering that siphoned millions of public dollars. The preliminary hearing took place on a crisp Tuesday, 4 months after the day Gerald pulled a gun on Alexis. The courthouse steps buzzed with reporters and citizens. Alexis and I arrived early, joined by Daniel, our quiet numbers guy who would testify on the financial trails. Monica, Victoria, and several city employees who had flipped were already waiting in the witness lounge. Then James appeared and motioned. For Alexis, she returned minutes later, face unreadable. What happened? I asked. She leaned in. They found a connection I hadn't anticipated, she said quietly. Court began with formalities. Charges read. Pleas entered. Every defendant said not guilty. Then came a curveball. A new name on the witness list. Robert Thompson. Our quiet elderly neighbor. Music drifted softly through the warm evening air as I looked around, still amazed that it all began with something as ordinary as a red Tesla parked in a driveway. Who knew that one small act of defiance would ripple outward and spark a transformation across an entire neighborhood? Sometimes, standing firm against petty dictatorships brings about a wave of justice far greater than you ever thought possible. And sometimes, the strongest weapon against corruption isn't force, it's the sharp, tactical mind of someone who's sworn to uphold the core values of democracy. Even in the pristine, HOA-polished war zones of suburban America,